Hello, everyone. Welcome back to AI Sana, Module 4. Today, we're delighted to welcome back Nader Elm, whom you've previously seen in a Module 4 case study on minerals and mining. Nader, thank you so much for coming back. We're so excited to have you again.
Now, I'm glad to be back and happy to help.
Last time, if everybody remembers, Nader talked about how he founded Exyn Technologies and he had a little bit of a journey into construction, but ultimately where Exyn found the most success was in minerals and mining. Today, we'll double down on Nader's experience in construction and he'll tell you about his new company and walk you through a case study on how to use AI and entrepreneurship to solve major problems in construction. Nader, can you reintroduce yourself somewhat and tell us what you're working on now in the construction industry?
No, of course, yeah. So my name is Nader Elm. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally a Brit, and my background originally started in engineering. So I went to university in London, University College London, and then ended up in the computer industry, working for fairly major computer companies at the time, Digital Equipment and Sun Microsystems, and then went off and did an MBA at London Business School, which kind of broadened my perspective on business, but also really stoked my interest on innovation and entrepreneurship. So after that, I kind of ended up working with a variety of large public companies, which included Bell Canada, working with the senior teams over there, Rogers Communications, which is a Canadian cable company, cable and television and communications company, and a real fun job at IMAX Corporation, so the big screen movie company. And while I was working at those companies, I was actually charged with starting up new companies within the larger enterprise. So, as an example, in IMAX, I had the privilege of starting up a company a spin out, which focused on selling IMAX, the big screen technologies, into people's homes. So if you had a room for a home theater, you could actually fit an IMAX projector and sound system in there. It was a lot of fun. But in that journey, I also wanted to kind of hop out from would have been classed as intrapreneurship, working within the larger company and working as an entrepreneur. So starting something from the ground up without any kind of external support, like brand or people or technologies, but at least you would have full freedom to look into all kinds of solutions for any kind of problems. So while I was at IMAX, I had the good opportunity to integrate with the entrepreneurship and venture capital ecosystem. And as part of that, I was doing diligence work for venture capitalists. And one of the diligence projects I worked on for an investor was to go out to the University of Pennsylvania, one of their robotics labs. There was a professor over there doing remarkable research in autonomy. So the software that goes on board vehicles to make them self-navigate in complex areas. So I went down to Philadelphia, I did the diligence and came back, and my report said, yes, there's something very real over here. And by the way, I want to be the person starting up the company. So that was the founder and CEO of Exyn Technologies, based in Philadelphia. That was 2013. And fast forward to 2021, 2022, the company had grown to roughly about 70 people. We'd raised about 66 million in equity, but also venture debt. We had developed 3 award-winning products, which serviced the mining market, underground mining market, which we started selling worldwide. So we were in Australia, South Africa, the Africas, Europe, and the Americas. So we were a global company by then. But then I decided to come back to the UK, and I'm now the co-founder of a company called Sterling X, which focuses on the data analytics that comes off vehicles, one of which is a drone, to help inform operations in various industries, including construction.
Nader, I won such an extensive set of experiences from engineering to management to entrepreneurship to entrepreneurship. One thing that strikes me is for those students who are watching this podcast today, when they watch your other podcast with us in minerals and mining, they will have picked up on a part of that segment where you said one of the biggest problems you had with Exyn Technologies near the end of your time at Exyn was that you saw areas for innovation in the data that was coming out of the drones. And I love that you took that problem and you're now doing that with Sterling X. It is such a great next step in the same series of problems that you've identified.
So one of the interesting things, so number one, I love learning. So no two jobs I've done have ever been the same. The other thing is every job has taught me something about the next job that I'm doing. And one of the interesting things is Sterling X really fuses two things I learned. One from Exyn, which was, as you said, it was Exyn itself focused on the data collection, but didn't focus on the data analytics side of things, because the assumption we made was there were already existing analytics tools on customer sites, so we just wanted to integrate with that. But we did see opportunities for us to actually extend ourselves up the value chain. So that's one thing. We saw opportunities on the analytics side, not just the data collection. But then I fused that with a learning I got from IMAX rather randomly, which is the end-to-end. So the fun thing about IMAX is that you can probably go and watch a Marvel movie on IMAX. So it's big screen, big sound, but it's being captured using different technologies, post-produced and then generated for IMAX after that. So that experience is very different to seeing an IMAX movie that's used an IMAX camera, IMAX post-production, and then put onto an IMAX screen in an IMAX theater. So that end-to-end actually revealed a few things. So the experience is, I should mention, significantly better, number one, because you retain a lot of the coherence of the data sets all the way through the chain. That is something we missed in Exyn, and that's something we're addressing in Sterling because we're addressing the end-to-end.
Oh, fantastic. While we're on IMAX, I know you and I, we've been friends for, coming on to 5+ years now. You are willing and able to share it. You shared with me previously a fun story about the first home install of the IMAX home.
Okay.
If you remember, somebody did major work in order to fit the IMAX home. Can you share that story really quickly?
I can share the story. I can't mention, in all fairness, who. But first of all, kind of what did we do? Actually, this will be a fun story. So IMAX, big name, big brand. It's relatively a small company. So in terms of its innovation budget, it was fairly modest. What we did was we did the macro analysis. We kind of said, okay, what are the opportunities for IMAX to grow? What can we do in theater? What can we do with movies? But then what can we do outside of the commercial IMAX story? And what we noticed back then, and this would have been 2011 through 2014, the emergence of streaming services. So Netflix was out. There was a variety of Apple TV was coming out, and we noticed big screens were getting bigger in the home. Sound systems were getting better in the home. So we foresaw, and we were following trends of movie viewing habits. And increasingly, we noticed it was moving from the theaters into the home. Not surprising. So we decided that we wanted to bring IMAX from the commercial theaters into the home. But we didn't have an outsized budget. We couldn't create a whole new product. So we decided to sell the same projection system, the same sound system that goes into AMC theaters and Odeon theaters over here in the UK, but just sell it for the home. What people may or may not know is an IMAX projector weighs in excess of 1.5, nearly 2 tons. There's 2 projectors.
Whoa.
It's a massive undertaking. So you need a projection room. You need these 2 systems in there, the audio racks, and everything around the IMAX experience is actually very, very well prescribed in terms of the aspect ratio of the screen, the sound proofing that needs to go into the room to isolate it from outside sounds because you need to get immersed in the movie, and so on, kind of where the seating can go. So you can't put it into any home. So one of the fun parts of my job was basically working with folks who were looking to have a 5 million home theater room in a $100 million home. And a lot of these folks, typically they're in New York, they're in kind of very nice, like London, nice cities, but their homes can't accommodate an IMAX theater because what we had to do was shrink everything down, but we couldn't get the screen less than 15 feet tall. Otherwise, the projectors were just too bright. And with projectors moving to laser, there was a risk of blinding people because it was too bright. So 15 feet was the minimum height. And we were looking for homes that were about to be built where we could interject with the architect early enough to kind of say, okay, you need to drop the floor, raise the ceiling to accommodate an IMAX screen. And there is a very famous Hollywood director, creator, who was a huge sci-fi fan, huge IMAX fan. And one of the interesting things about these folks is they can't go to the theater like you and I do. So they can't experience movies when they first come out. Otherwise, they're celebrities, they get kind of hit on if they go out. So giving them an opportunity to have an IMAX experience in the home, this is unique. So we had to redefine his home theater, even though the building had been built. They had to knock down, I think, 3 feet of foundation to open up 15 feet of clear space for the screen. And then the other fun thing was basically 3-phase power supply. His home didn't have 3-phase, so he had to work with the city to get 3-phase power fed into his home just for the IMAX projectors. So yeah, it was a lot of investment around just the IMAX screen and projectors.
Wow, that is an investment and an undertaking to get more than 4 tons, more than 4 tons worth of equipment, of commercial grade equipment into a home.
It was a fun part of my job, actually, kind of saying no to wealthy people. Not something they're used to, because we just couldn't put it in their home. They didn't have a room big enough for us.
Yes. Well, on that little detour, thank you for entertaining that little detour. I love that story. I loved it the first time you told it. I love the new information that you're given this second time you've told it. I hope you'll tell it again. Let's move back to the construction industry. Tell us a little bit about Sterling and tell us about the problem that Sterling is solving, and how did you find this problem?
So the problem, so I'm a co-founder, and so the genesis of Sterling actually happened even before I joined, by virtue of a venture studio. So actually, let me take a step back. There was an investment firm called Galos Technologies. They're UK based. They focus on security in the broadest sense. So cybersecurity, they've made a lot of investments in firms as a venture capitalist. So, they look at startups coming up and cybersecurity, they've made several investments. But they've also got a team. They themselves are ex kind of entrepreneurs, but also folks involved in the various security elements of the United Kingdom. So they've experienced their own challenges in their old jobs, and they're kind of saying they haven't seen a solution developed yet. So they look at that as an opportunity to start up their own companies around these opportunities that they've identified. So Sterling is one of those new build opportunities that they kind of conceived, and they built a team around. So I was brought in really as an entrepreneur and co-founder for Sterling X. And the thesis is this, that there are a lot of companies that do data collection. There are a lot of companies that do storage, aggregation, and analytics. But as I mentioned, one of the things that I noticed at IMAX is there's a lot of nuances lost from collection to when you finally get the output of an analytics report. And there's an opportunity really to kind of provide consistency and coherence from end to end, from where you capture all the way through to how you generate the report. So Sterling proposition is focused on the end-to-end of data collection all the way through to data analytics insight, with a focus on a few industry verticals problems. And we started with infrastructure, more specifically linear infrastructure, and more specifically in the construction phase of the linear infrastructure build. So the data that gets collected in the construction phase of long linear infrastructure, so think rail, but a lot right now in the UK is around wind farms, the cable corridors being developed around that, and tracking progress, but also managing and maintaining security around those critical national infrastructure elements, especially given what's been happening in the geopolitics of the world these days.
Yeah. Um, what is linear infrastructure? You gave some examples, but what is that? I've never heard that.
Yeah, so there's critical infrastructure. So think of nuclear power stations, power lines, all the way through to rail and road. So linear is literally that. It's long, straight things. So rail, road, power lines, communications cables, all of those kinds of things. The reason it's kind of separated out as far as we're concerned is basically because the nature of data capture is different when you're looking at linear infrastructure versus, for example, inspection, which requires deep, detailed kind of zoom in on something. So construction of linear infrastructure, you need different kinds of vehicles to capture very, very long lengths of projects, constructions. What that basically means is if you're looking at drones, fixed wing drones with wings rather than quad rotor hovering drones, because you can capture a lot more information using fixed wing versus regular quad rotors.
I see. It's such a unique problem because of the scale and the distance that's needed to be covered in linear infrastructure.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Interesting. Tell us about in the construction phase of linear infrastructure. How does somebody go about planning for it, gathering the data necessary to plan for it, gathering the data and analyzing the data necessary to start executing on the construction and then monitoring the construction?
Well, and that's exactly it. There's various phases to a construction project. Initially there's going to be just a lot of planning done, and that's I'll pick on an example. Wind farms, which offshore wind farms, they basically got the big turbines out in the sea. There's the cables that go under the sea and then they hit land. But for it to integrate into the national grid, you've got to create a corridor. And these corridors can be up to 200 kilometers long before it actually connects with the national grid. So, all of that cable needs to be laid. And there's various considerations which go into that. So part of it will be the topology of the land. Are you going to be hitting particular natural obstacles along the way? Part of it will be settlements and other infrastructure. There'll be roads and rail. There'll be towns or hamlets along the way. So there's a lot of scanning and data collection that happens really just to inform where the cable route is going to go. So that's the first thing. And then after all the plans have been approved, then you get into the initial stages of construction, which might require you to actually start building out routes for materials and tools and equipment to kind of go. So sometimes there are temporary road structures that are built just to enable the equipment to show up and the materials to show up. So that's the first phase, and then the real construction work begins. And so you do the construction, then you kind of finish, and then you're in the maintenance and monitoring mode. So now you've got it down. You just want to make sure everything's running smoothly. Any kind of capturing cracks and corrosions and the remediation that needs to be applied to it, all the planning that goes into that. So we get involved in the very early stages. Our work right now focuses on kind of the planning phase and the construction phase. We also do work in the maintenance phase, but given the nature of projects right now, there's a lot of construction going on. We're involved in that. So this will be, kind of the dig that has to happen to drop the cable in, all the materials that have to be in and around it. And then once it's actually being closed up, then just following the movement of the construction project as it goes down. And one of the biggest challenges is really just tracking the progress of the project and comparing it to the plan. So, this is where we thought we'd be, this is where we actually are, what's the variance, how do we explain that? And in that, there's a lot of other moving parts that you've got to manage. And so data collection really kind of feeds into that. So you've got to understand what data needs to be captured, how it needs to be analyzed, and how that feeds into what kind of report and what kind of time frame, so you can actually build your processing, capture as well as processing capabilities alongside it.
It sounds like there's so much work to be done. And I imagine there's lots of different companies that are involved in the construction and the surveying and etc. Before the Sterling X solution, what was the status quo? Like, what are the options if people didn't have Sterling X? What are people using now?
No, so the interesting thing is the construction world has gone through a fairly substantial change in terms of, for example, operating drones. They are using drones right now for data collection for that planning and construction phase. It is limited by, number one, regulations. So that's one thing. Number two, also the platforms themselves. Sorry, actually, three, the third thing would be the sensors. So the regulations will determine the paths you can take, how far you can go, i.e., how many hops you have to make. The drone itself.
Sorry, what does that mean? How many hops you have to
So takeoff and landing spots. As an example, in the UK, you can go get a license to be a qualified drone pilot. As you fly a drone, you can only go as far as 500 meters, and then the drone has to come back. So if you think of a 200-kilometer project, that's a lot of takeoff and landings. So that's one thing. The other thing will be the limitations of the drone itself. So let's say you have permissions to fly beyond 500 meters, or in certain cases, what you can do is have a pilot every 500 meters so that as the drone's flying, you can hand over control that. But the battery life on a quadrotor is typically half an hour, 40 minutes max. So that limits how far you can go. And then the sensor itself. So what resolution do you need of what kind of data sets? So that determines how fast you can fly. So you might have a 4K camera, but if you're flying really fast, you won't be able to capture enough data of the underlying asset you're trying to inspect. So all of these things kind of limit the efficiency. So what Sterling has done is, on the one hand, we've got regulatory permissions beyond what most people have. So we can fly much farther. We can fly beyond visual line of sight from the pilot, while we've got other visual mitigators. So these are folks who are on the ground. They literally just track it and they're on radio, just kind of say it's flying where it should. So we can fly much farther distances with platforms that are made to fly long distances, fixed wing platforms, using very, very high resolution sensors. So you're capturing the data along the way. All of this adds to, basically dramatically improving efficiency of data collection. To ground it with an example, several years ago, a company was, there was a construction project going on. They had to do a monthly survey of the full length of the construction. And it took them upwards of 3 weeks of data collection, analytics, and so on. And we've collapsed that now to 3 days. And in 2026, so by the time this video comes out, we'll be at the beginning stages of collapsing that down further to 1 day. So we'll have gone from 3 weeks to 1 day on the collection and analytics, because we're working on the analytics side as well.
This is reminiscent of, as students are watching the other podcast that you guest starred on, it's reminiscent of the value improvement that you were able to bring to the minerals and mining industry. I mean, I think there you collapse the speed by 100-fold and the amount of information and data by 1,000-fold. And here you currently, in the early days of Sterling, you're able to do 7x speed improvement, and you're about to approach upon 20x speed improvement, which is substantial. So you mentioned the limitations of the industry and the current drone-driven approaches in the construction industry for data collection. What about data analytics? things?
So that'll mean different things to different folks. So our approach is basically the data gets collected. There's going to be various treatments that need to be applied to the data set. And then you can set about analyzing it. So one thing will just be change detection. So, this is what it was last week. This is what it is this week. What's changed? So there are various tools that are available off the shelf that apply to that. However, once you actually start layering other things, because the fun insights happen not because of taking the same sensor and running it along the same corridor, but rather fusing data from different sensors and layering that on, because that starts revealing other things. So think of what if taking data sets from LiDAR on top of camera, on top of other sensors you might have on board, but then fusing with other data sets which are not on the platform itself. So weather data, traffic data, all of those kinds of things. Because as an example, one of the biggest challenges in any construction project, whether it's, building a new stadium or putting a cable in the ground, you have to move earth. Earth properties, literally digging ground or leveling ground, earth movement or earthworks as they call it, is the biggest cost item in any construction project. Kind of makes sense. It's a lot of it and it's very heavy and it takes a lot of people and a lot of specialized equipment. But earth has a funny thing that its quality changes depending on a lot of external factors. So if you can actually improve the data set by fusing different data sets, you can actually start kind of creating new analytical models to help planning, but also execution and tracking of the project itself, all with a view of kind of dramatically reducing the actual construction budget. Mm-hmm. Everyone benefits up and down the chain. And the faster you can turn around this data, so one of the benefits that we provide is collapsing that timeline. So you can kind of say, okay, within the day, I can actually get the data sets, analyze it to inform what I'm doing tomorrow, not working on data which is 3 weeks old.
Yeah. So again, another speed and information value proposition here in the construction industry, that similar to what you've previously done in minerals and mining. Let me ask you just a couple of questions about, one, how did Gallows and you help refine this problem into a business model? So that's the first question. And then the second is, what does that business model look like within the construction industry itself?
So the first question, so Gallos, they'd conceived the idea, and this was mostly as a national capability that needed to be developed for the critical national infrastructure, both in terms of the construction, but also the maintenance and monitoring that will happen later on. So one of the key things right now is a lot of sensitivities around non-sovereign products. So we just basically, that was an opportunity first and foremost. But what the more exciting thing is really around the data collection and analytics. If we can actually create something over there that will be globally applicable, not just UK. So in terms of, how we crystallized the idea, again, I talked about this in the last session, it's very much around talking to customers. Get intimate with your customers, get as much knowledge from your customers. So we took a multi-vector approach to this. One is, have people in the company who've been in that industry. That's one of the first things you've got to do. So we've hired, we acquired a company which did drone flights, data collection flights for construction customers. So that was one way we brought that experience and knowledge in-house. Then we built a board of advisors, folks who have worked either in the industry or have serviced the industry using other kind of technology products adjacent to what we're doing. So it would have some relevance. But then there's nothing that replaces bringing in the voice of the customer directly. So establishing relationships with those players in the market and co-opting them into a design partnership. This is something we talked about in the last session. So working with them to understand all the facets of a particular problem and then build a product with them to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're at right now. We're actually working with design partners, fairly early phase in Sterling X. It only started up and formed in July of this year.
Okay, early days of the company, but it sounds like, you've been able to accomplish a couple of things. One, regulatory permission, and it almost sounds like an exception to what other drone companies are subjected to. I think that is a substantial undertaking.
It is, and it's, I wouldn't say, yeah, it absorbs a lot of the team's time because the thing is, we have to work with the regulators to actually work alongside them to test all of these kinds of things in order to open up the skies.
Yeah.
So, if I rewind a bit, so the regulators, the FAA in the US and CAA over here in the UK, they've got a job to do. They've got to make sure things are safe in the skies. Every time you fly a plane, you don't want to worry about going into a drone. So that's what they do. And at the same time, they want to unlock a lot of economic value in some of the airspaces. And, so for example, drone deliveries, everyone gets it. If you could get drone deliveries on demand from your online purchase, that's going to be great for everyone. But it's got to be done safely. So the regulators set up these sandboxes, as they call them. So they bring in industry players and allow them in a kind of fairly contrived, controlled setting to operate, and within that generate data so that they can then understand more about the risks, the risk profiles, and then start defining, okay, how that risk can be mitigated either through operations or technologies or a variety of other things. So one of them is this beyond visual line of sight. And there is a sandbox created in the UK. And we're very fortunate to be one of the companies in there. Now, most other companies are focused on drone deliveries. We're focused on data collection. Yes, very few people, but it hasn't been broadly, it's not part of regular operations yet. We're still very much in the testing phase, and we are doing this kind of testing actually in one of our customer sites, the long linear infrastructure, where we're actually sending our robots to do data collection on these very, very long corridors with just one pilot.
I see. Are you able to deliver on your value proposition in other countries where you don't have regulatory exception?
That will be one of the limiting factors. We have to make sure that we operate within the regulatory requirements of that particular country. So right now, we're very much focused on the UK, but we do have aspirations for growth outside that. Now, what I can say is there are other countries who are less restrictive about their space. That's not to say they're less safe. It's just basically the nature of the country that they're they won't be as densely populated as the UK, maybe. So, for example, in North America, they are already doing beyond visual line of sight flights. So it'll be an easier move for us to move to the US.
I see. I want to make sure we kind of shift this conversation back to the broader construction industry and how AI can be used to innovate. What is the AI innovation in Sterling X?
So we're using AI actually up and down the chain. So talked about this in the last session, this as an exciting thing for if I was to rebuild Exyn, but something that we're doing in Sterling today, which is basically using AI, everything from ideation, wherever it might be in the company, to use AI really just to kind of test ideas, build out ideas and shape it all the way through.
Can you tell us, as you're walking through this workflow, can you tell us the tools that you're using? And if you don't want to, that's okay. But can you tell us, if you can, the tools that you're using and how you're using them for each part of this work?
No, of course, exactly. I'll talk about some of them in more abstract terms. But for the early stages, ChatGPT, especially the paid version, the pro version, it's absolutely amazing how much you can leverage it and doing deep research. As an example, just again, I have no construction background really beyond what I learned on the job in Exyn when we briefly thought we were going to go into construction, and then we pivoted out. Nowadays with ChatGPT, you can actually start kind of doing a deeper dive. Everything from just major market size, so what's the total addressable market? Who are the major players? Who are the folks who are kind of seen as innovators? What kind of innovations they've driven, so as to try and identify who might be good design partners, all the way through to now you've got conversations going and you've got some idea of what the problem might be and fleshing that out into, what a product might be. So getting some definition around that. Then you start getting into coding, and there are a variety of different coding tools available, everything from ones that will help you on the front end in terms of the user interface design, things that will help you on the back end in terms of the analytics and processing. And beyond that, just in terms of, for example, putting security infrastructure around everything that you're doing, because you're dealing with very, very sensitive customer data sets. So that one, it's an evolving and maturing. So we tend to kind of move around because there's technologies that keep on leapfrogging each other. So one of the disciplines we've developed internally is not tie ourselves down to a particular platform yet. The one constant and consistent platform is, funnily enough, ChatGPT. I will say, though, that I think that's just a matter of preference. I would say Gemini and others, Claude, perfectly good as well. I just happen to have subscribed to ChatGPT. Actually, that might be an interesting experiment. Subscribe to different things and kind of see the diversity of responses and kind of see how we feel about that. Yeah, maybe we should try that. So in that sense, and then, just basically all the quality assurance and testing that comes on the back end of these things, just to make sure things are working the way they should. So we've seen AI in the development side of things, but then there's AI as a key component of the actual product itself. Not doing this yet, but ultimately what we'd like to kind of see is putting AI, large language models, on board. So as we're doing the data capture, what can we do in terms of leveraging AI to inform the mission while it's in flight? So I think I mentioned this earlier. So you're going down a corridor or a construction project, you have an expectation of what it should look like, but then you spot something in flight that deviates. So pause the mission, go do a more detailed inspection of that, whatever deviation might be, and then resume the mission so that when it feeds back, you might get more insight into why things have deviated.
Interesting. It's almost as if you're mid-mission redefining the mission based on the information you're able to gather in the first phase.
One of the beautiful things about AI is basically we're getting closer to actual artificial intelligence. What would you do if you were walking a construction site and you're tasked with, here's what it was last week, here it is what it is this week, and you notice something unusual? You would stop, you go and investigate, and then you'd resume your task. So these are the kinds of things we can actually start building on board. Now, there's a whole question, literally on board, is if you have persistent communication, is that something you can offboard? But the point being that AI can really unlock a whole new set of activities and value for customers once implemented. But there's going to be a whole lot of development and training that needs to go into that, and regulatory considerations around it as well. How much can we do without applying more risk to the mission?
Yep. That element of AI seems complementary to what you mentioned earlier about adding in additional sources of data, because we see a number of industries where AI is being used for data fusion and data analytics across massive databases where there's might be information overlap, but the structure of the data, the format, etc., is just different enough that you either substantial human manual data analysis, or you have to use AI in order to be able to reconcile the relevant data points.
That's a good point. Yeah, exactly. So once we've collected the data, what does that mean? Kind of collecting data for data's sake, great, but you want to kind of act on it. So when it comes to construction, there are various things, like as we talked about, fusing, for example, weather data, traffic data, all of these things. So you've constructed it. There's particular weather patterns that might have happened during the construction. Then you track what's happening to the condition of the road with traffic on it to understand deterioration patterns, if only to help inform how you should be constructing it differently next time. All of these kinds of things rely on data. And to your point, it'll be unstructured at times. Stitching it together and fusing it's going to be challenging. But I think that's where AI really has the potential to simplify and reduce the friction in those kinds of tasks. So right now, I think we're at the early stages of kind of seeing the benefits. But if you just take the line forward, you can see how much new insights you can get from the data sets we already have historical. So I'd love to kind of see, right now, we're working on the construction phase, how we can get involved in the maintenance phase, given the data sets we've collected and the detail that we have.
Let's talk a little bit more about the construction industry and data collection and analysis. You mentioned that the construction industry is using modern technology like drones, etc. How much data does the construction industry and the individual construction companies actually own? Like, who are the players who own the data? Who are the players that analyze the data? Who are the players that use that data?
Yeah. So the construction industry, I mentioned this in the last podcast. It's a and this is now 10 years old, by the way. It's a McKinsey study which kind of said it's an $8 trillion global industry, and $3 trillion was lost to waste and inefficiency. And anyone who's done a large scale home improvement project has probably lived it, kind of in terms of the delays that happen, in terms of the budget overruns, the cost overruns. So it all makes sense. So it passes the smell test. It's a $3 trillion problem. And once you dig into it, you realize there are not justifications, but there are reasons why it is that. Construction is a very complex industry because it involves many different players. So right at the top, you have the project owner. So the person who actually is paying for the project is going to be owning the project. Then you've got the general contractors. Under the general contractor, they're going to be all the subcontractors. All the subcontractors may subcontract out again. So there's going to be multiple layers. But it's exponential complication in terms of coordination, communication, and all of that kind of leads into the inefficiencies and the friction in the system. As an example, we actually saw this live in my last company, where a construction customer who was, think of an Amazon warehouse. That's the kind of structure that they would build. There were the folks who actually kind of set up the vertical beams and kind of holding up the top structures. And the roofing people were totally different people. So they would come in after these guys had been signed off by the structural surveyor, and the roofing people would come in and they're expecting to kind of see these beams of different heights kind of allow for a slope on the roof. But all these beams look alike, and two of these beams have been swapped. Now, all of a sudden, you got a beam which is too short on one side and a beam which is too long on the other side, and you got the roofing folks sitting on the ground doing nothing because they can't actually start work until that's fixed. So these kinds of things happen, they get missed. So this is where automating the data collection process improves speed, improves accuracy, but it also dramatically reduces all of these mistakes and the friction that gets introduced into the system. Now, that one mistake, by the way, cost $50,000. So, because someone had to go up there, cut off the top of one and add it to the top of the other one, and 3 days of delays before the roofing folks could get started. And then everything in the project plan is shifted to the right by 3 days. And a lot of those 3 days add up and it becomes months, kind of becomes a major headache for these kinds of projects. So if we can automate, if we can improve the resolution, the timeliness of data collection and analytics, you can avoid all of these kinds of things. And even post-project, now aggregate multiple projects and apply AI to it to understand where the bottlenecks might be, where the hotspots might be. Now you can actually start improving future planning for future projects.
Almost like proactive troubleshooting as the project is progressing. If the project owner themselves have access to information and not the individual subcontractor siloing their own information.
And that's the thing, yeah, exactly, because the general contractor is responsible for all of this. And their surveyors are the ones who are signing off on the subcontractor's work before the next subcontractor shows up on site. But nevertheless, mistakes happen. They just cost a lot when you're talking about projects at scale. So the more we can reduce these kinds of things, it's a massive efficiency gain. But the learnings, continuous learning and improvement within the project, but then across the enterprise as well, as you start looking at, on the one hand, multiple contractors getting better connected, but also at the GC level, the general contractor level, where they can improve their management of future projects.
In the existing status quo, is it that every subcontractor has their own data collection technique and their own database? Are they sharing with the GC, or how does that information get captured and stored somewhere?
Yes to all. And that is part of the problem. So there are data sets which are captured by each of the individual contractors. They will share that with other contractors, but only that which is relevant to the next contractor.
Ah,
Not because they're trying to withhold, it's just basically there's no reason to over reveal, overshare. But then at the general contractor level as well, it's kind of summarized. Now, the more shocking thing we've noticed actually in a couple of projects is some of the dynamics in the industry. So on the one hand, one of the key limiters of the opportunity we found certainly in the developed countries, a lot of these projects are insured. So the willingness to actually invest in these kinds of solutions is somewhat diminished because they're kind of saying, look, I'm protected through insurance. So even if it kind of overruns, goes over budget, or kind of collapses, I'm insured. Now, other forward-looking folks will look at this and kind of say, okay, I don't want to run the risk, or I can improve my margins or improve my competitiveness vis-a-vis other people. So those are the folks in the construction industry who are really kind of pushing the innovation, because they're looking at it as a transformation of the industry.
yes, yes. And an ability to, you said, 3-day delays end up compounding, and now you're a month, 2 months, 6 months. And on those 6 months, if you could work on another project, then add another project into it, then your top line improves.
Yeah. But just to go back to your point about data capture, where it's held and how much is shared, that is something that still needs to kind of resolve itself, because the thing is, data is captured, but it's not fully disseminated. Partly because, again, it just depends on what sensors you're using, how it's structured. Not everyone can share everything, even if they wanted to. It's just impractical. So removing that kind of friction is one thing. But then what happens once the project is complete to that data? Because in certain places, that all gets deleted because they've moved on to the next project, which is a little shocking because there's a lot that can be learned from historical data over time, especially in the world of AI. You can use it for training and help improve future projects.
Can the Sterling platform, the software platform, independent of the drones, the hardware itself, can the Sterling software be that centralized location for all subcontractors to submit that data in any format, in whatever messy, structured or unstructured format they have?
Can it? Yes. Will it? It's really dependent on the client sets, because it's their data at the end of the day. So, we would have to figure out how we license it or how it's actually stored and shared. So technology not being the limiting thing right now, it's mostly down to commercial sensitivities.
I see. It's so fascinating, the difference between your experience in the construction industry and the minerals and mining industry. Because it seems like in minerals and mining, there's the people who own the mines, they have all the data, they have all the employees, they understand the full flow of it. And really the complication is that they can't safely get the data. Here, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of messy data. There's so many players involved. The construction industry is pretty fragmented in terms of who plays in what space. It seems like there's so many parties involved, and the data is both abundant and messy and also somehow incomplete. Such a contrast between those two industries.
It's fragmented. I think that is the biggest challenge we have. We wouldn't know it's incomplete. That's the thing. It's kind of like we'll stitch it all together. So yes, I think there's a huge opportunity in this space. Still a $3 trillion problem. Projects aren't finishing on budget, on time yet.
Yeah.
We'll know we're done when that happens.
Yes, that makes sense. I want to be, able to kind of point this back to how the students are going to go out and establish their own sense of identity by identifying problems and opportunities in the construction space. So can you help us understand, if you weren't working on Sterling today, what are other problems in the construction industry that you think are worth solving and with worth being defined in your criteria of a big enough market, a crucial enough market with customers who are willing to pay, and something that can be scaled beyond just that initial use case?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, if you focus on the activities themselves, there's still a lot more that can be done. I mean, I mentioned earthworks. It's still a major cost item, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to reduce the variances and errors in earthworks.
On that point, how can AI be used to help reduce variance and error in Earth?
I think it comes back to learning from. Let me take a step back. It's still a science, sorry, an art rather than a science. There's a lot of art in it. So these folks who are kind of designing the plans, it's still very mandrolic.
Mm.
So the more data that we can feed to an AI to kind of help it learn and optimize the process and planning, I think that can drive a lot of efficiencies throughout the process. And like I said, a lot of it is because of things which are outside of just the regular control. So weather is a major contributor to the variance. So how can we learn from past weather patterns and the variances it drives, and weather forecasting, so apply AI to forecast better so that you can actually then say, okay, these are the days, even though it might be 2 weeks ahead. So we're delaying things by 2 weeks, but it'll actually drive a better outcome at the end. So imagine that kind of a scenario. I'm making it up, by the way. So,
Perfect. Please make up opine away. Okay, so earthworks, and then what else? What are other problems where people can use, or in particular, our students can use AI to solve problems and opportunities in construction?
Well, I think fundamentally, let's boil it down to the things that matter to the construction. It's the budget, it's time, and it's the other thing, safety. It's kind of making sure that people get to dinner at the end of every day. So anything that can help push that agenda. So what are those going to be? So earthworks really kind of focuses on the budget, kind of reducing the cost. More broadly, if open out this aperture of that, anything that will help improve the accuracy of forecasting and even recording right now. So, what is the project and its status right here, right now? So on a construction project, there's something called a BIM, Building Information Model. And, that is a comparison of the as is to plan. So both of them have errors in them. So if you can reduce the errors on both of those, makes the analytics a lot easier to understand where the error, what the variances might be and how to improve on that. The other thing that I mentioned, which might be interesting, is basically what can you do to improve the risk profile of your projects, and risk, not just the fact that you're slipping on budgets and time, but even human risk, theft risk, so that your insurance premiums start coming down. You're not paying as much to insure the project through the construction phase. One of the interesting things anecdotes we were told, I can't mention which project, but hundreds of millions of pounds worth of capital equipment just disappeared. And we're talking about, these are earth moving equipment, think of Caterpillar equipment, materials, stuff that you're using for construction are kind of just disappearing. So these kinds of losses are obviously suboptimal. It causes delays, causes risks to the actual construction project itself. So all of these things, if you can improve on, it'll help the overall profitability of the project, reduce the long-term risk. The other interesting thing from my observations at Exyn, multiple contractors working on one project, but the risks are all combined. I can mention again. I'll kind of give you an anecdote. It was another construction site, and it was what they call HVAC, the air conditioning folks, putting in air ducting. And essentially, they had a plan. All the air ducting had been constructed off-site, brought on-site to be installed on an expected structure, but the structure they encountered was different. So there was a beam interrupting one of the ducts going through. So their solution, rather than delaying the project, was literally cut the beam and let the air duct go through. And again, missed by the folks who are actually kind of signing off on it. So that they're looking at the air ducting, they're kind of saying the air ducting looks like it's been put in, missing the fact that the beam had been taken out. And thankfully, got caught. But fast forward, 5, 10 years, and there's a collapse of that section of the building because the beam wasn't holding the weight. These kinds of risks need to be captured, cataloged, measured. So again, I think AI might be a massive enabler of these kinds of things, quantifying, identifying risks.
The students that are watching this podcast, I hope some of them tackle some of these problems. These seem like major problems. One other thing that you mentioned earlier is cybersecurity. As the construction industry is digitizing itself and using more AI solutions, I imagine that cybersecurity then becomes a big risk, especially if these construction companies are working on major national security sensitive infrastructure.
That is true, actually, yeah, because now I think, given the developments over the past few years, cybersecurity has always been top of mind, but I think increasingly so now. And to your point, you're absolutely right. The data sets being dispersed in so many different places, it needs to be, number one, secured, but also transferred securely and shared securely. So I think there's going to be opportunities opening up over there as well.
Fantastic. We're at the end of the time that we've asked of you. Let me just say thank you so much. We so appreciate you sharing as much as you have about the construction industry. We know construction is important. It is an industry that is ubiquitous across every country we've been to. But the challenges of the construction industry, based on how many people and companies participate on each project, I don't know if the students feel this way, but I for sure have so underestimated, underappreciated that complexity. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And it serves as such a great place to apply AI in places where siloing, multi-party participation, data fragmentation, all of that is so prime for AI and automation.
Absolutely. Let me just add one parting thought, though. Everything I've talked about has been in the context of US, Canada, UK. One other observation is basically there are other places where the construction industry is more vertically integrated. And I look at someone like Japan, but that's not to kind of say that AI can't be applied over there. It's just going to be a very, very different set of analyses that can be run over there. But yes, no, I think there's a huge opportunity for AI in this space. The $3 trillion problem is still there.
And I imagine that McKinsey market report, that number has grown since. So
I've got to dig it up. Yeah, exactly. It's no doubt a lot larger. Let's ask ChatGPT.
Yes, that's true. Or Gemini or Claude, whatever you prefer.
The tool of choice.
Nada, do you have any parting words or advice or wise sayings for our students?
No, I'm the last person to give any kind of sage advice. All I can do is kind of, from my part, having grown up in corporate world, moving into entrepreneurship, I guess my parting thought would be that entrepreneurship, it's a thrilling ride. It's not an easy ride, but one of the things I kind of really, really enjoy is the fact that you have the freedoms to solve some very, very real problems in a meaningful way, and that is the bit that I've really enjoyed. Plus, kind of working with teams of exceptional people who are motivated to solve. They converge on a problem and they're looking to solve that. Not to kind of diminish what's happening in the corporate world, but I think entrepreneurship, for me at least, has been a hell of a ride, and I'm hoping to continue that for a long time to come yet. And I would encourage folks to really kind of engage in it in whatever way, go into it wholeheartedly or just do it as a side project. Try before you buy, but definitely creates outsized value.
Thank you. The students in module 1, they have learned about how entrepreneurship itself can be a venue in which they can have impact, and lifelong impact, not just monetary impact, but lifelong mission driven impact. And what you've said is just another ringing endorsement for entrepreneurship with one of those channels. Thank you so much. Again, we so appreciate you. We appreciate the time you've given us between this and our prior podcast recording. Students, you've heard it from Nader. Entrepreneurship is exciting. It is hard, but it's exciting and it's a great venue for impact. If you got to try it, and then you'll see. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Again, this is AI Sana, Module 4.
Thank you so much.